I don't know how, I think I have to talk fairly quietly. I'm at the center in Sydney, and I'm not sure how thin or thick the walls are. I think I have people right next to me, so I have to talk fairly quietly. So can you hear me talking like this?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, welcome, Venerable.
That's good. Okay. So it means I can't get excited like normal. I can't get excited and talk quietly. It just doesn't work. So I have to turn you guys down as well. Hang on. So does this turn me down, or is my voice changing now?
No, your voice is the same. You want me to test? Is my voice loud? Now yours is lower.
Well, this is no good. I've got to try and make you guys lower. So how do I make you guys lower? Hang on a minute. I don't know how to. How do I make you guys lower? I don't know which volume button I use. Have somebody got a Mac? Can you talk quietly for a second? If you've got a Mac, and someone's got a Mac, can you tell me how I make my volume softer? Not making yours softer, not making mine softer. How do I make your volume softer, your voices? Can someone tell me?
Hello, yes. When you turn down the volume, it only makes your speaker quieter, not the microphone.
I know that, so I need to know how to make the microphone quieter.
On a laptop or on an iPad?
I'm on a laptop.
On a laptop, you have the toolbar on the top.
Yeah, I'm using that. That seems to, but Tara just said, as I moved it, it made my voice quieter. I want to make your sounds quieter for me. I don't want to make the microphone quieter. So if I'm moving the button now, listen, I'm going to move this button now. Please tell me if my voice is getting quieter. Is my voice getting quieter?
No.
No, it's fine. So then you must talk again, would you? Elena, talk again.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, that's fine. I've got it. It's okay.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay.
So I hope I can hear you guys. Okay. Okay. So here we go again, our last module. This 1 year we've been together, 13 months, gone like a dream, like all of life, which is a great teaching in itself. This last one, the end result, the most advanced level, if we're talking junior school, high school, university, well, this is postgraduate. We're now going to look at the postgraduate teachings of the Buddha. And the reason we're going to do this is so that we can quickly become a Buddha. Quickly. In the prayers, often it says, when you're talking about Tantra, it says quickly. So we want to quickly become enlightened, not because we're lazy. If we had to, we would, to benefit all sentient beings, we would walk, we would crawl on our hands and knees if we had to. But because we have such compassion, this is the point, because the great beings have such compassion, then it's so marvelous to have a quick method, because the suffering of sentient beings is unbearable. So of course, most of us don't have that level of compassion. So but we say the words, we mean it from our hearts, and imagining it's possible to have that level of compassion. It's possible to have that level of compassion. So imagine we have, and we think, for the sake of suffering sentient beings, I must quickly become enlightened. So for that reason, I'm going to listen to these teachings. We're thinking like that. Are you all there, people? You've gone. Have I lost you? Are you still there?
We're listening, Venerable.
I can't see you, that's all. Hang on. I've taken my
We're ready to offer you a mandala, Venerable.
Okay, so please, so now we say this prayer, please, with that in mind. Okay. No, sorry, I said the wrong thing. Stop. I said the refuge prayer. This is the mandala. So for this, so we're going to, that was our motivation. So we'll say again anyway. So now we're going to offer the entire universe, the contents of the entire universe, every marvelous thing in the universe that makes sentient beings happy. We're going to offer all of these to the Buddha as a request for these teachings.
Rukunanda Shila Chepacho Jetsun Lama Tampa Kenam Kecher Kikala Kense Trin Trin Jita sampe du je mala, sakye chuki chapa, vatu so, idam gururatna mantalakam yachayami.
So that those words I said before refer to this prayer. So we think that way. We'll say it 3 times in English. We'll say it 3 times in English. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits of listening to these teachings, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create by listening to these teachings, may I become a Buddha to benefit all suffering sentient beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. All right. So again, you need to read carefully John Landau's course notes. He's a really excellent teacher. He covers everything very beautifully, very clearly, and very logically. And as usual, I'll just say a few words to help get a bit of a taste. Okay. Okay. So there is no way in the planet possible you could sort of jump into Tantra without first doing the rest of the path. It's very simple. Not because you're not clever, not because I'm advanced, so I can understand things. It's because literally one way of presenting the teachings that would be a prerequisite, the prerequisite for entering into Tantra, the way Lama Tsongkhapa presents it, is that you need at least a semblance, of the 3 principal aspects of the path. This is one way, and all that is another way of presenting what we've just done the last year. It's just another way of presenting the lam-rim. That's all it is. So the three prerequisites, these 3 principles are renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. So as we know very well from our 12 months of study, this analogy I use all the time, the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, the first 2, or as we know in the lam-rim, the first and second scopes, the teachings and practices suitable for the disciple of the least capability, and the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. That's the wisdom wing, and that's the practices you must do in order to get renunciation, to renounce, to give up suffering and its causes. So if we take the 4 Noble Truths as other packaging, Lord Buddha's first teaching, then that's the presentation. The entire 4 Noble Truths is in fact the teachings of the wisdom wing, and that's the teachings we share with the Theravadan path, the Hinayana. They're the teachings, same, just the same. And those teachings are the teachings that Lord Buddha gave us in order for us to quit our own samsara, to give up our own suffering and its causes. Then, of course, we have the compassion wing, which is the Mahayana component of the path, which is the accomplishment of bodhicitta, as we've discussed, So from practice, so the very first scope, or I like to call it junior school, what you're learning to do is understand the essence of the first scope, as we know, the essence of it is to understand the law of karma. But the instruction is that's the first level of giving up suffering and its causes. And so, but that's what you, by practicing abiding by the laws of karma, practicing the first scope, practicing junior school, what you're learning to give up is the grossest level of suffering, the suffering of suffering. And then the second scope, you're giving up the suffering of change. So by abiding by the laws of karma, you learn to know Buddha's telling us, he's telling us that he's suggesting as the first level of practice, he's suggesting we don't kill, we don't steal, in other words, we don't harm others. There's a list of 10 things, aren't there? We at least begin to think about, if I do not want future suffering, then I don't cause it. So of course, what this is presenting, is the Buddhist, this fundamental part of the entire Buddhist path, which presents the concept of the mind, which is beginningless, which is coming from past lives, and which goes on to future lives. That's implied in this teaching about karma. Presents this entire worldview of the Buddhas, which came from the Indians before, that there are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of consciousnesses, all of them existing in one realm of existence or other, all created by those very same sentient beings. And that's, of course, as we're seeing, the unique quality of the Buddhist teachings, or certainly the Hindus before. This observation coming from their view that sentient beings, trillions of sentient beings, all experiencing these different levels of suffering, are all in samsara. So the lowest, the grossest suffering, the heaviest suffering, the suffering of suffering, when the bad things happen, is in terms of the big picture, is the lower realms. We learn about that. So the Buddha is giving us instructions. If we don't want this kind of suffering, if we don't want that kind of suffering, then the method is to stop causing it. And because everybody is the cause of their own suffering. So that's genius law. The essence of it is abide by the laws of karma. The reason is because Buddha is suggesting to us, if you don't want future suffering, especially the suffering of the lower realms, then you don't cause it. So that's all. It doesn't go into great detail in these teachings. It's taught from for the perspective of a person who takes karma and reincarnation as a given. So for us people coming from the Christian perspective or a materialist perspective, we need extra kind of teachings on that to get us to be really clear about how the Buddha is not a creator, so forth, so on and so forth, like that. So then the second one, you go to the next level of practice, and you by abiding by the laws of karma, you give up the heaviest level of suffering. At least if you continue to be moral and kind and ethical and don't harm others, you'll get another decent human rebirth, bare minimum. But the Buddha goes further and he says, well, that's fine. At least you stop the grossest level of suffering. Now you can stop the next level of suffering, which is the suffering of change, which in the samsaric point of view is actually what we call happiness. So this is the piece where if we want to understand Tantra specifically, we have to understand this model, this level of practice. We have to understand the second scope, the middle scope. That means we have to understand the mind. We have to understand attachment and the delusions. Because one of the approaches in Tantra, at a psychological level, it's a much more sophisticated level of understanding the mind, in which a practitioner is capable of utilizing the delusions on the path, utilizing the delusions. So that's clear. If that's possible, if you can utilize attachment and utilize delusions on the path to enlightenment, because at the second scope, we learn about the delusion, we learn about the mind, we learn about the root of the problem. First, you control the body and speech, which is abiding by the laws of karma, to at least not get the grossest level of suffering. Then the next level, next scope, we learn about how to give up all kinds of suffering. So here is the suffering, not all yet, the suffering of change, which is what we think is happiness, which is what Buddha has identified as a subtler level of suffering. So the only way to possibly understand that, is to understand attachment and the delusions, which is what's presented there. So from the point of view of renunciation, the first level, by abiding by the laws of karma, we're giving up the gross level of suffering, the heaviest level of suffering, lower realms. And the second scope, middle scope, but by understanding the mind and particular attachment in the branch delusions, where then we're giving up the suffering of change. And that is not possible if you don't understand attachment. If you don't understand attachment, how it works, you can't begin to understand how to give up suffering at that level. Not possible. And you absolutely, with greatest certainty, cannot possibly understand Tantra. Impossible. Literally impossible. It's like the lamas always use the analogy, the Tantra's like, they use the concept of an alchemist who can transform poison or certain things into something else, or the idea of using poison for medicine. Anybody who's clever with knowing, understanding, say things that grow can, certain things would destroy you if you ate them without understanding them. If you understand them, you can use them for medicine. That's the concept. You have to know what attachment is. And that's something, if we don't study the mind, if we don't go into more depth and understand the mind, studying low rig and clearly distinguishing a delusion from a virtue, and specifically distinguishing attachment and knowing what it is and knowing the other branch delusions, it is impossible to understand Tantra. Impossible. Very simple. So by practicing the first and second scopes, we then understand what suffering is, the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change. And of course, by practicing again and again and again, we develop a very powerful disgust. The thought of having suffering is too horrific. We understand this in ordinary life. We absolutely understand. If you have some suffering, you know, it's ordinary level, you get a bellyache. You do not want a bellyache. You can't stand the bellyache. So you know the only way you can fix it is by knowing what the cause is. And then by that gives you the solution. And then what prevents you from eating that food again is the thought of that suffering. This is very simple and very logical. But it's something I think for us in the more sophisticated kind of modern society sounds very kind of, oh, that sounds very kind of like insulting, you know. You've got to have fear. And especially we can't stand that. It sounds very inferior to think that you have to have fear of suffering. But I don't think that's unreasonable. Everybody knows if you drive too fast or drive recklessly that you're going to destroy yourself, not to mention everybody else. So the thing that prevents us from doing that is very simple, is the horror of the suffering we will have if we drive recklessly. Sure, we have compassion too, and sure, we're scared of getting caught by the police. But the idea of not wanting suffering, of being disgusted by suffering, is something completely reasonable. So, I mean, it's sort of arrogant to think that that's not a very sensible method to develop fear of suffering. It's so logical, it's so reasonable. And obviously, it's the most basic level. When you've got such compassion and you prevent harming others because of compassion, well, you're a pretty advanced person. So in a sense, the words that make sense to us, having this revulsion for suffering, being revolted by suffering, being fearful of suffering, of future suffering, we could say, and this words work for us in the modern world, it's like having compassion for yourself. They don't use those words, you know, it doesn't make sense. Compassion by definition is for others. But we would say that. It's like, another way to put it, when we understand the first and second scopes, when we understand what suffering of suffering and suffering of change are, and we know we do not want them. Another way to put it would be you'd have self-respect. You'd treat yourself respectfully. And that we understand in the West. We talk all the time about self-love, self-care, how to take care of ourselves, you know. This is Buddha's method of how to take care of yourself. This is Buddha's method of self-care. That's literally the point, Whereas the trouble is, as we all know, if we've come from fundamentalist religious backgrounds, it sounds when you listen to the Buddha's teachings, it sounds exactly the same as fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalist Islam, or fundamentalist Judaism, where they actually talk about the fear of God, you know. You have fear of God because you do not want to be punished. Well, it's the same principle here, but the point is, though, the crucial point, which I say repeatedly, and it does make a difference for our minds, this suffering of suffering and suffering of change are not punishment, because there's no punisher. In fact, we do it to ourselves. We do it to ourselves, but we hear it as punishment, which is why up when Westerners first heard Lama's, always this famous, Lama Zopa, when he first started teaching the lam-rim in Kathmandu, you know, Kopa, with all the hippies in the 70s, you know, Rinpoche would go in great depth, in detail about each of the lower realms, each of the hell realms, the hot hells, the lower hells, in the greatest detail, straight from the texts. It would be just absolute shock and horror for all the hippies, you know. It is too shocking. What have we come to? This is even worse than we've ever imagined from the most fundamentalist Christian teachings, you know. So it's very hard for us to hear this. It's hard for us to hear about things like the lower realms because there's no framework for us. You just launch into it. It's one of the first teachings. And the background isn't. The background, it's like self-respect. If you want to treat yourself nicely, meaning if you want happiness and you don't want suffering, then that's the basis of the first and second scopes of practice. But it really takes us a while to hear that. And I think even if years and years and years of practice, we still don't hear it properly, you know. I mean, for example, there's a friend of mine who's a teacher, a Buddhist teacher. And he completely misunderstood the four opponent powers, which is the practice of purifying karma. So the very first step is called regret. So he thought it was thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That's exactly we don't hear it properly, in other words. Shouldn't have done something is a totally meaningless statement. If you've got a tendency to get diabetes, your response to the discovering that you ate sugar, you'd be shocked. Why? Because you don't want diabetes. It's a really healthy attitude. It's a really intelligent attitude. That's the attitude with karma. But it takes us time. We don't go into too deeply, you know. We don't, karma sort of, it's very abstract for us. But this is the fundamental starting point of understanding Lord Buddha's teachings, the fundamental starting point, which is really presenting Lord Buddha's worldview, you know. This idea that everything we think and do and say is the process of producing the person we become. So exactly the same, if you really want to understand Tantra and the process of say, guru deity, a deity yoga we're going to talk about, of turning yourself into a Buddha. That principle of changing the person you are is right there at the beginning in the lower scope, in the description of Tantra, cause and effect. How each person in the universe, each second is producing the person they become in the future. And each person, each second is experiencing the fruits of their past. It's a really powerful concept, but it just takes us time to hear it, you know. When we really begin to understand this, already we have an incredible sense of practice. There's no way in the world we'd want to say one negative word. There's no way in the world we'd want to say one negative word or do one negative action, not because of guilt, not because I might get punished or I might get caught, which is an instinct of ego, because I can't stand the thought of future suffering. That's the greatest self-respect you could possibly have. That's the action of a really intelligent human being who has respect for themselves. And you look how difficult it is. Your sister says, "Man, you know, your sister's upset with you." Your sister, one mean word, was so upset. She did this and she did that. People have been Buddhists for years in Buddhist centers, fighting with each other. She said this and she said that. She's the cause of suffering. Karma goes out the window as soon as we get hurt by somebody because we haven't really internalized it. It just really takes time. And this is the first level of practice, this basic principle of the Buddhas that we all produce ourselves, you know. So it takes time. It takes time. So if we don't understand this process, don't understand the process of everything I think and do and say produces the person I become. In this case, the first level, the suffering, which means I don't want suffering, which means I do want happiness. If we can't get that properly, we can't possibly understand how you turn yourself into a Buddha. Not possible. Impossible. Impossible. So the first prerequisite is to have some sense of renunciation, which means understanding what suffering is. Suffering of suffering and suffering of change. And wanting not to have it. Being revolted at the thought of future suffering. So therefore, giving up causing it. Giving up suffering and its causes. And the causes are my own actions. We are our own creator. We are our own boss. As His Holiness says, karma is self-creation. This is the first prerequisite. So then, next one, as we know, the next one is now the Mahayana path. You know, bodhicitta. The next one is bodhicitta. And that, of course, bodhicitta is the culmination of this next component of practice, you know, my calling at university, where now we realize that all sentient beings are just like us, all in the same boat, all experiencing the fruits of their past actions. And so we continue to work on our minds in the great scope. There's no difference. We continue to work on our mind. That doesn't change. But the emphasis is different. The reference point is different. The main emphasis of the first and second scopes is wanting ourselves not to suffer. So now we expand our mind enough to realize we're all in the same boat. And now we continue to work on our mind. So we start to break down the barriers. Oh, goodness me. What's this? What's happened? I have to do something. I have to do something a bit urgently. I'm really sorry. Just a second, please. I'm so sorry. Hello? Oh, yeah, hi, Lisa. How are you?
Well, a little change of plan, impermanence. And for that, I would like to announce again that what Venerable Bina is referring to the three principal aspects of the path Laksam have invited Geshe Tenzin Soba to come to Laksam online from Australia, and that will be on September 10 at 11 Swiss time. So if you wish to have a Geshe-las explanation, please join in, and I will post information in the chat later on, and hope to see many of you. It's going to be a cooperation between the 3 Swiss FPMC centers, actually one of the big ones that we cooperate on. Sorry for disturbing. Hopefully.
All good, Lars.
Yeah. We go. About the questions about how you can donate to Venerable Bina, you will go to her webpage, rabinacoaching.com, and there you can donate to the Bodhicitta Trust that she's preferring people to offer to. So there you'll find information, just her webpage. That's the best way. That's where Laksama actually, we also just donate on to Venerable Bina, and we'll give it to the Bodhicitta Trust. So yes, online.
The link is there for her website. Just type her name in. You can find her easy. And there's a trust section, like area.
Yes, and while we're waiting, I may suggest that you'll do a few Mani mantras silently, just to stay with the motivation and not going back to news or the worldly affairs outside. So just doing some mantras. I'll be starting right now as well.
I think she just logged off. She'll be back on in a second, probably. Ah, Lars.
Yeah.
Is that on purpose?
She's coming back, right?
Yeah, here she comes. And unmute.
I cut myself off. I'm sorry.
There we go. No, it's
I
okay.
clicked the wrong button.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the first prerequisite, we need renunciation. So renunciation is got by understanding the first scope, which means giving up the future suffering of suffering. The second scope helps us understand the suffering, give up the suffering of change. So the two of these is the beginnings of our getting renunciation of suffering and its causes. The first prerequisite. And it's as I said, it's an intelligent approach that it enables us to understand the logic of karma, and understands, crucially, it helps us understand the nature of the mind and how it works, particularly the delusions, particularly attachment. Because of all the delusions, it's always talked about, the Tantra is the transformation of attachment, the using of attachment, you know. So without knowing what it is, and this is the thing, if you don't study the mind, I mean, we learned a little bit in this module, in the lam-rim, you learn about it, but you've got to study low-rig to really comprehend exactly what attachment is, which means you need to understand concepts, that all the suffering states of mind are concepts, and that's a shock to us. And that's something we might have heard 1,000 times. I mean, again, just recently, one of the courses I was doing, some friends, one of them has been studying for 15 years, a good practitioner, taken empowerments, devoted, got a guru, and we were discussing. And it was the first time I heard, first time he registered in our discussion, the first time he registered that the delusions are rooted in being concepts. This takes us time. It is not how we think in our world. When we think of anger, to think that it's a concept sounds like a joke, you know, we don't even comprehend what it means. So we have to study Buddha's model of the mind to understand what it is, because attachment is a concept. I mean, the definition of attachment is a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the nice aspects of something. Anger is a conceptual state of mind that exaggerates the ugly aspects of something. We have to hear these words. It's not the way we think of the mind in our modern neuroscience and psychology at all. So if you don't understand how these delusions are conceptual stories that are but deeply habituated in our mind, which is why they're emotional, then we can't possibly understand how we can transform and use attachment. Just not possible, impossible, just impossible. It's very simple. So the second prerequisite, as I said, we move now to the great scope. We need to have an appreciation for, and eventually realization of, a bodhicitta. And this is the driving force for the holy beings, for the great yogis practicing Tantra. The skill to practice Tantra comes from understanding karma and the mind, particularly the mind, and eventually having shamatha, which we get in the you know, when we realize emptiness. But what drives the bodhisattvas, what drives the great tantric bodhisattvas, what drives them to want to practice is bodhicitta. And without bodhicitta, it wouldn't work, not possible. It just wouldn't work, you know. It just becomes something totally self-centered, totally self-centered. So bodhicitta is this outrageous shift in the mind, a paradigm shift in the mind, which is the culmination of developing love and compassion. Unbelievable compassion for sentient beings. And that culminates as this extraordinary, this powerful bodhicitta. It's not another level of compassion. It's not compassion. It's the result of compassion. This outrageous attitude has two parts. One is you know with certainty now that your job is to help sentient beings. There's no longer the thought of I. When you have bodhicitta, there's no longer the thought of I. You know you are I as opposed to you, but there's no longer this thought of getting something for the I, which is what drives all of us until, you know, that's gone. There's only the thought of others. And then the long-term aspect of bodhicitta is this never giving up over countless lifetimes, no matter how long it takes. This fierce determination to never give up, becoming a Buddha because of this, driven by this extraordinary compassion, only to benefit others. This is the heart of it, you know. And that's the great scope. And the third prerequisite is then I haven't finished. Yes, the next one is an understanding, appreciation for emptiness. And that comes after we've accomplished bodhicitta, as we know, and we study the 6 perfections. Because the bodhisattva, once you've got bodhicitta, you go from life to life to life, perfecting the first 4 of these perfections, perfecting generosity, perfecting perfecting morality, perfecting patience, perfecting perseverance and enthusiasm, which is the compassion wing, if you say, put it that way, perfecting those practices in relation to sentient beings, accumulating this mountains of virtuous karma, merit as they call it. And then the last two, getting, concentration, shamatha, so that you can finally use that to get insight into emptiness, the third prerequisite. So the way Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama, mentioned this. He puts, shamatha actually, as we've known from the teaching, shamatha is not even a Buddhist teaching, it's Hindu. It's come from these amazing Indians. They're the ones who created this technique. Emptiness is the Buddha's approach, emptiness is Buddha's explanation, Buddha's presentation of finally how everything exists. Finally, how everything exists. If you like, all the rest of the path up to there is all the presentations of the conventional reality. And when we learn about emptiness, we're learning about the ultimate reality. And we put these two truths together, and this is our method, one of the best methods for understanding finally, how everything that exists has no intrinsic nature. And why Buddha is telling us that, and why we have to realize that, is because the deepest mistake in the mind, this maripa, this primordial ignorance, that is the root delusion, the core, the branches of which are attachment and all the others, which we learn about in the second scope. He's telling us that the root delusion, this ignorance in the mind of all sentient beings, believes with absolute certainty that there is an intrinsic me and intrinsic everything else. So he tells us finally that is the mistake. And we are ready now from practicing the three scopes all the way. Finally, we get to the final stages of the three scopes of practice. And our minds are ready now to be able to realize this. And so thus cut the root of samsara, cut the root of suffering. That's the third prerequisite. And again, without understanding emptiness, Tantra is insane. It's the activity of a mentally ill person. Visualizing yourself as a green lady and a blue this and 74 arms and 2 legs and imagining all these bizarre things without understanding emptiness. Without understanding emptiness, this is an impossibility. It's like a joke. So these are the prerequisites. It's not possible to utilize attachment on the path if you haven't got renunciation. It is not possible to even want to bother practicing Tantra without bodhicitta. And it's not possible technically to understand it without understanding emptiness. These are the 3 prerequisites, and we've practiced that. We've studying that the last year. We've covered all of that. That's the conventional reality. All of that is the components of the convention of the way things exist conventionally. And then we've looked at how things ultimately exist. These are the prerequisites. We're even beginning to contemplate. That's the point. You don't have to wait till you've got a high realization. You'll never start if you do that. So, okay, there's different ways of describing what Tantra is, and again, I'm just using my words for it. It's basically a Buddhist psychology. There's no question about that. It's simply Buddhist psychology. And it's just another way of presenting Buddha's observation of the way the world is, So one way of presenting is in terms of the if we think of Buddha, the word Buddha refers to actual enlightened mind. That's the ultimate Buddha, the absolute Buddha, they say. And that's the actual consciousness, enlightened consciousness, the mind of a Buddha, or known in Sanskrit, they refer to that as the Dharmakaya, the Dharmakaya. Kaya means body. And they're often translated as truth body. That's the actual Buddha, the absolute Buddha. So unmet mind is not physical. So the fully developed, fully omniscient, fully developed mind of a Buddha, the Dharmakaya. Mind is not physical. So therefore this mind pervades wherever there is existence. There is nowhere that mind can't be. Because think about it, something that's not physical. It can't be confined by space or time or matter. I think of it like that. So Buddha's mind exists wherever there is existence. It can't not. So it's not physical. It's omniscient. It knows that which exists. It is infinitely compassionate for every living being, for whom, for that mind of the Buddha, there is no difference between self and other. There's no longer the separateness, no longer a distinction between self and other. And there's infinite, has this quality of infinite power. That's Buddha. That's the absolute Buddha. So now you've got then you have the relative Buddha. And that's known as the Rupakaya, the form body. Rupakaya, form body. So out of that compassion, that Buddha just naturally will manifest effortlessly in countless bodies, driven by their compassion, but also driven by their power, because of their compassion for sentient beings. Because sentient beings cannot communicate with the Dharmakaya, not possible. To the Rupakaya. And then you've got two of those. And this is where Tantra comes in. So one is known as the emanation body, the Nimanakaya. And that's, really that's Shakyamuni Buddha. That's the current Buddha. From the point of view of the sutra teachings, that's the emanation body, the Nimanakaya. Effectively that. And that's in the sutra teachings. And that's the Buddha we can see, the Buddha of 2,500 years ago. And they talk about the supreme Nimanakaya, which is that one, the Buddha of any given time. So at this moment in time, it's Shakyamuni Buddha, the fourth or something of this eon of time and of the 1,000 founding Buddhas. That's how they talk. And that's the emanation body, the Nimanakaya. But then you've got the Sambhogakaya. And this gets us to Tantra. The enjoyment body. So the main Buddha there, for us, where we talk in the Gelugpas, is Vajradhara, or Tibetan is Dorje Chung. And he's blue. In a simple aspect, he's blue, and he's usually, either in single or you see him in union with his consort, which is the female aspect of the same Buddha. When you see the Buddhas Lama Zopa says you shouldn't say consort. It's not consort, that's an ordinary word. Wisdom mother, Lama Zopa calls. Wisdom mother, the wisdom mother. They talk about the father mother. And these two unified. So Vajradhara or Dorje Chung. And I always tell the story, I always quote, you've heard me say this story many times, when I was in Kopan, when I first went there, in the publishing room, typing all the prayers and everything, and kept coming up with this person called Vajradhara. And then I discovered he's the same person as Dorje Chung, and I was very happy. And then I asked Lama Yeshe, who is this? And of course, Lama, with his wonderful ways of answering, he said, he's the biggest Buddha, dear. So I was very proud. I like the biggest Buddha, Vajradhara, Dorje Chung. That's the main Buddha in Tantra. And then under him, you have the 5 Buddha families. And under them are all the other thousands of Buddhas. So the simplest way to put it, using modern language, it's basically Buddhist psychology. And every one of those Buddhas is only the manifestation of different parts of our mind. That's it. Only, that's all. I mean, you even think of Shakyamuni Buddha. Think of it like that. Shakyamuni Buddha we see a statue or we see a picture, we make it very concrete. But think about it, what it is, what does it represent? It's there's something about, when we think of art, we think this is Buddhist art. When we think of art in our modern world, we think of it as a kind of very personal expression. And that's what it is. In fact, think what it is, exactly what it is. It is, in fact, an expression of something in our mind. So we know these days there's all kinds of art, conceptual art and modern art, all kinds of abstract art, and people come up with anything, and anybody's allowed to do what they like. Of course they are. They can do what they like. But it is, obviously, it goes without saying. I remember my sister Polly is a painter. I remember before I became a nun, I spent a couple of days in her studio, and she gave me an easel of paper, big sheets of paper, and 6B pencils, a few 6B pencils. I'd never picked up a pencil except when I was a kid to try and draw, and I never have since. But I did a bunch of drawings. In fact, Polly said I had potential. It was interesting. I never thought of it. She sent me these drawings later, years later, 40 years later. I didn't even keep them. But I just did a few drawings. But I remember vividly, just a few days, I did these drawings. They were drawings of my own fist, of clothing, of a chair, different things. I just played with it. But I remember vividly, when I looked at those drawings, I saw that was me. I knew it was me. It was me because it was an expression of my mind. It's very obvious. It's not esoteric. It's very clear. I mean, whatever words come out your mouth is you, isn't it? It's so obvious. So art, we see it as something very separate out there. All that nice art. Look at Picasso's art. It's just an expression of that person's mind. How else is it not? That's all it is, isn't it? So so-called Tibetan art, this iconography, they're expressions, they're very clear presentations of different psychological qualities. Now, the difference, so Shakyamuni Buddha is exactly that. That's all it is. If you look at that, a picture or a statue, that is an actual representation of subdued body, speech, and mind. It's a perfect physical representation of subdued body, speech, and mind. It's so clear. It's just by looking at that statue is telling you exactly the entire path of how to get out of samsara. Now in Tantra, it's exactly the same. So here, this is where the difference is in what it's expressing. What it's expressing. So that's the first scope, and the second scope. It's all about subduing the body, speech, and mind, harnessing your physical and verbal energy. That's all about that, and that's represented by Shakyamuni. So now look at Tantra. Completely different. The pictures are completely different. There's, it's called the bodhisattva style. It's called the bodhisattva style. And it's based on the Indian royal style, or aristocratic, So for example, you see, for example, Tara. I mean, she's naked. That doesn't look very nice. She's sexy, she's got big breasts, she's gorgeous. I mean, I know when Lama Zopa was showing some person how to do a statue, he kept saying with Tara's breasts, make them bigger, because it's a completely different approach. That's not about subduing your mind, having this gorgeous naked lady. It looks like shocking. So what's it mean? It's so confusing to us. What's that mean then? How can that be a Buddha? How's that subduing your body, speech, and mind, having some naked lady in front of you? Well, you look at Vajrayana, this gorgeous red lady, because they're completely different psychologically. It's a completely different level of psychology, totally different. You got Chenrezig. Okay, you can't tell it's compassion, but you learn it, you buy into that meaning. It's a sweet, peaceful aspect, and it's the practice, it's the visualization, it's the manifestation of compassion. You've got Manjushri, Manju, gentle voice. He's orange, he's holding aloft a sword with fire on the tip. It's the manifestation of wisdom. So of course you can't see it, it's not evident to you, it's a language and you have to learn it, You have to learn this new language, but it's a completely different approach. Because in Tantra, all of the delusions in the beginning, so this is where we really can begin to understand this principle about Tantra of utilizing the delusions. So the very first, if we take attachment, as Buddha's telling us, attachment is the main cause of suffering, okay? Effectively, marikpa, ignorance, is the root cause, but samsara, the expression of this desire realm that we live in, is an expression of attachment. So attachment is effectively the main cause of suffering. So from that perspective, and the entire path to enlightenment is a method of giving up suffering, including Tantra, really, it's the same. It's a method of giving up suffering and a method of, of benefiting others. It's a methodology to help you give up suffering and for you to help others. That's what the entire path is, including Tantra. So if attachment is the main cause of suffering, because we're driven by it uncontrollably, the very first level of practice is control the servants of attachment. Control your body and speech. Junior school, first scope, pretty obvious. The next level, you really begin to practice. Now you look at attachment itself. And that's why you have to study the mind. Attachment is a conceptual story. All the delusions are conceptual. When we study the mind, we know we have two ways our mental consciousness can function, just two. One is called conception and one is called perception. So that's, in the Buddhist analysis, perception is a subtler, is a more direct type of cognition that is not conceptual. And so that means we have to understand what conceptual means in the Buddhist view. It's a very, very specific understanding of the mind. So attachment is this conceptual story that exaggerates the deliciousness of something that was driving us totally. that causes us to be emotionally hungry, that causes us to feel like we're missing something. Therefore, it's driving us to find something out there, in particular, the objects of the senses, that then appear divine to us and appear very real, as if they're existing and from their own side out there, begging me to take them. And when I get them, it'll fill me up and I'll get happy. That's attachment's job. So it's a complete and total lie. It's an absolute total fantasy. So at the next level, so the very first level, you control the servants of attachment. You leave the chocolate cake on the plate. This next level, when you begin to understand attachment, technically understand it, and emotionally understand it and identify it in yourself, you could say, with this intelligence that understands what attachment is, because you can see it, you can even begin to taste a bit of cake without the mind going berserk. You could sort of say it like that, as Lama Yisi says, without going berserk. Because you understand attachment now. You've got some renunciation, but you're very cautious still. But then you go to the compassion wing, and you now develop focusing completely on giving up self-cherishing, which is a consequence of attachment, which causes us to put us first. And we finally make this paradigm shift where now we put others first. So this whole emphasis, this bodhicitta, that's when your compassion is so strong for others, you can say you still have attachment, but it's completely subdued by the intensity of your compassion. So you could argue you could happily eat a piece of cake solely for the sake of others, and it would not disturb your mind because you have such compassion. You can talk like that. So it's different levels of understanding this attachment and its power. The very first level, control the body and speech. Just don't touch the cake. You're too berserk. Next level, understand attachment, unpack and unravel and see it intelligently. You can begin, because you're aware of it now, you could argue, you're not going to go complete berserk if you have the cake. Now, the compassion so overrides everything that even though you still have attachment, it doesn't matter. The cake won't affect you because you're so much compassion for others. And finally, you could say when you realize emptiness, then you're in control. You can say like that. There's no problem now, because you cut the root. So now that's the person who's got the three levels of the three prerequisites. That's the person who's qualified to effortlessly use attachment. So technically, I mean, I'm not, what's interesting, technically they talk about in Tantra how you use attachment, but technically you're using what Tantra is a method for doing, is a method for proactively contacting an object, having consciously choosing to have contact with an object of attachment. The cake, use the example of the cake, very simple. And you would actively choose to eat the cake in order to activate and utilize the pleasure that is triggered by contact with the cake. That's the way to say it. So the first level, you leave the cake on the plate. You're too berserk. Next level, you can begin to understand a little bit. Next level, your compassion is so enormous it's not dangerous. And then you realize emptiness. You're out of the fire. Now that's the yogi who can effortlessly have contact, consciously have contact with an attachment object in order to trigger the joy that arises naturally in the mind when we have contact with an attachment object. And all of this is understood technically when we study the middle scope. When you understand how the mind works, when you understand the 12 links. For example, what happens when we have, these 12 links, the different, first you have the ignorance. Then you do an action, and that seed leaves a seed in your mind. The consciousness, the third one. Then you have contact with an object. And that triggers attachment, the sixth one. I forget the order now, but it's something like this. What's happening is this. This is the way. This is the technique. There's a cake outside there. There's attachment in the mind. Attachment in the mind. Hunger, emotional hunger, missing something. I'm hungry. I'm emotionally hungry. I feel I don't have enough. So we're craving. This is what attachment is, this energy of craving, something that you feel you're missing. This is attachment's energy. So then because of familiarity, the cake arises in your mind. So then what happens? Then you focus 100% to get the cake, don't you? And you need the mental factor called contact. You know, the cake is outside, your mind is here. You've got to have contact. It's a mental factor. Contact is one of the mental factors that's neutral, neither negative nor positive. And that plays a role. So there's a cake out there, there's you in here with the attachment, and then there's contact. The second there is contact between your sense, your tongue, and the cake. The second there is contact between your tongue and the cake, that triggers pleasure, happy feelings. Remember we have go back to low rig, go back to the mind, and you've got three categories of states of mind as far as Buddha is concerned in the mental consciousness. You only have three. You have those that are negative, delusional, neurotic, ridiculous, that just lead you up garden paths and cause you suffering. Then you have virtues, love and compassion, etc. Then you have this third category that they call neutral, which I call the mechanics, that are neither negative nor positive, but play a vital role in our very existence, in our experiences every second. Concentration, intention, attention, discrimination. Contact is one of them, and another one is called feeling. And there's only three kinds of feeling: pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. Well, then, all we're wanting, all attachment is wanting, the junkie, is pleasant feelings. A pleasant feeling is another word for happiness, is another word for joy, is another word for bliss, is another word for ecstasy, is another word for rapture. Levels of pleasant feelings. Levels of pleasant feelings. And all we want in samsara, having a body of the five senses, we are junkies to get pleasant feelings all the time. This is samsara. We are junkies to get pleasant feelings. Why? Because we don't know how to get them. Because everything we do by following attachment increases our suffering. That's all, like we're living in nightmares, you know, because we don't know the method for how to get pleasant feelings. Buddha's methodology is method for how to get pleasant feelings, how to get happy. Happiness is a nice word for pleasant feelings. Happiness is not outside. Happiness is not the name of the cake. Happiness is not the boyfriend. Happiness is not the object. Happiness is another word for pleasant feelings. And we are junkies right now for pleasant feelings. And Buddha's methodology is a method for how the hell to get pleasant feelings. That's all it is. So contact with the object, then what's triggered is a pleasant feeling. That's why we think the cake is the cause of happiness. That's why for countless eons, we've been shoving in the sensory objects through the five senses to try and get pleasant feelings. So we understand all of this in the second scope. If you don't understand this technology, you cannot possibly understand Tantra. It's like a joke. It's like a farce. So Tantra is a very sophisticated methodology for the person who's qualified, the person who's got the three prerequisites, the person who's got renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, who can consciously, actively have the cake, have the object of the senses, as Lama puts it, without the mind going berserk. And why? Because that pleasure that is then triggered in the mind upon contact with the object is able to be utilized by that person. And that's it's a technical point. As Lama says, Tantra is highly technical. So when the yogi has got, so this is when, okay, this is just a general idea, philosophical, psychological, okay? An example of how you talk in Tantra. First level, you leave the cake on the plate because your attachment's too berserk. Next level, you begin to be understanding. Next level, got compassion, that overrides your attachment. You could argue, you haven't given it up yet. Next level, you realize emptiness, you're out of control. You're in control now. Finally, you're able to actively energize. So this is where, in general, the general approach in Tantra, when you see all these Buddhas, I mean, they're the bodhisattva style. They're totally looking gorgeous because the whole point of all these deities is there to energize us. They're there to energize us. These practices are to energize us. Of course, energize pleasure, energize joy is the point. To energize joy, basically. It's, you know, when you try to, and that's why from the very beginning, when Lama Yeshe taught Tantra to the West, to us hippies, you know, he could see straight away, he said, you Westerners are very intelligent. You're very intelligent, very educated. He says, we could understand this principle of being able to transform something negative into something positive. Something like that, he said. So he always taught us from the very beginning, you know. He's very extraordinary. He's so wise somehow. But you can argue in general, sort of a way of talking about it in daily life, you know. Like he said to us, he said, you people don't even know how to be happy. You know how to suffer. You don't even know how to be happy. Totally miserable, because that's ego, self-pity, miserable, always unhappy, angry, depressed, jealous, anxious. It's not being mean. We suffer, you know. So when you can learn by getting some renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, then already you're kind of joyful person. Already you're more happy. And then you add Tantra to it, you know. So then the attitude in Tantra is to have, it's like the ultimate in self-respect, using ordinary daily language. Especially with bodhicitta, I always quote Grace Kelly, that gorgeous American actor, you know, Grace Kelly. She said, of course I have to look beautiful. People have to look at me. Well, that's bodhicitta, and honey, that's Tantra, you know. So the whole tantric approach is to learn to activate the better part of ourselves, to identify. So this is what a deity yoga, the essence of the practice of Tantra is expressed in what they call deity yoga. And we're going to be discussing as we go along, you know. So then, if you're going to, so this is why a Lama from the day one could see the benefit of these kinds of practices. He'd do Tara, he'd do chin raising. So I mean, Tara is this gorgeous green lady, you know, totally divine, totally divine. So identifying yourself, instead of identifying yourself as we do now, with I'm hopeless, I'm no good, I'm fat, I'm this, I'm that, I'm not, always dissatisfied, never enough qualities, never enough. This is exactly the samsaric manifestation. So by practicing thinking that you are Tara, thinking you are a divine being, how powerful psychologically, so intelligent, you know, so incredible, so amazing. We know we even just do these practices very softly, very easily. It lifts you, it lifts us, you know. So again, another way of putting it is when you're practicing deity yoga, it's a way of identifying your good qualities. You're trying to identify with your good qualities. Going through the stages of the lam-rim, you're pointing out your bad qualities. It's exhausting for us, you know. You're pointing out your bad qualities. It's exhausting for us. So now we're proactively pointing out our good qualities, and we see how difficult this is because nobody likes their body. Everybody thinks their body's the wrong shape, the wrong size. Our eyes aren't the right shape. I remember reading an interview with, you know, all these people who consider so gorgeous. I remember Audrey Hepburn was considered to be totally divine, you know. Didn't like the shape of a nose, thought her left buttock was too fat. I mean, I'm just joking, but this is how we all are because we are dissatisfied. The energy of attachment is we are always dissatisfied. You've got to understand that. We learned that back in high school. We are dissatisfied. We're never enough. We don't have enough. We always want something more. We should be better. We should be this. So Tantra, you're proactively identifying with your perfection. I mean, it's incredible psychologically. It's incredible psychologically. It's incredible psychology. It's brilliant. Think about it. It's a powerful method. Because if every thought you have produces the person you become, even for 5 minutes, identifying yourself as the Buddha, unbelievable, with perfect qualities and perfect body and radiant and blissful. How amazing. How incredible, you know. And they say in Tantra, this deity yoga, we're going to go into more detail. The way they say it is it's psychologically, it's bringing the future result into the present. So it's like what we call, it's the ultimate in positive thinking. You imagine the future. I want this. You know, you imagine the future and you bring it into the present. And basically, it's not just fantasy. By visualizing yourself as Tara, it's not fantasy. You are creating the cause to become Tara. So it's amazing. And this is why they're said to be such quick practices. Quick, you know, Tantra. Well, there's a technical reason it's quick. We'll discuss that later. So this is just general kind of talking, okay? So I think it's important you ask me some questions now about anything I've discussed. Nothing more, trying to discuss what I've just talked about. Ask me questions. If you have any questions, please. Nothing? No question?
Yes, Venerable.
Yeah.
This is Cyril.
Good, Cyril, talk to me.
So if I understand correctly, excluding deity yoga, but the idea of Tantra is basically to utilize pleasant feeling in order to energize us to not suffer, to be happier, basically. Is that
It's
so? You
one of
eat
the
the cake. You
one of
eat
the
the cake to be
one of
happy.
the one of the
because you won't
approaches of
suffer from
Tantra,
it.
yes, one of the approaches of Tantra is the ability, it's the method of not rejecting attachment, but of utilizing attachment. That's the way to put it. Of not rejecting attachment, but utilizing attachment. That's the better. So technically, it is I can't hear you, Cyril. I can't.
Oh, I'm
where
not
are you?
talking.
No, that's okay. So it's actually the way they talk about it's utilizing the delusions, and particularly utilizing attachment. So the extra point is why you utilize attachment is because it triggers this pleasure, and that comes later when a person has got single point of concentration. When you've got shamatha and you're doing deity yoga, then they say that the bliss that's triggered in the mind of a yogi by practicing Tantra is much more powerful bliss. And when that's combined with the concentration, that enables the mind to get to the very subtlest level. Sort of like this bliss that's utilized is enhanced. The bliss of a person who's achieved samatha is pretty incredible, unbelievable. If you read Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra, it's hard to even imagine the levels of, Lama calls the words literally ecstasy, rapture of a mind that's focused. So the bliss that's energized in practicing Tantra is said to be far more powerful. And therefore, it's sort of, for me, it's like a rocket boost that enables the mind to get to even a more subtle level, to get to the subtlest level of the clear light mind. That's why Tantra is said to be so powerful. That's a technical reason. Shamatha in the sutra practices is so incredible, the level of mind, but Tantra, with the tantric practices, the bliss that can be energized is even more powerful, and that enables the mind combined with concentration to get to the very subtle level, which is what we need to access in order to achieve Buddhahood. So that's the answer to it, Cyril. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the specific, but the general attitude of Tantra is utilizing the delusions and a particular attachment. And that's obviously more sophisticated.
So
and the person who's qualified is the person who's got renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness.
So it's utilizing attachment to get at a higher level of bliss.
Well, that's
which is a more subtle, which is a more
something like that, Cyril. I'm just saying it very roughly. Yes, something like that.
Understand.
The general way they talk is it's utilizing the delusions as opposed to rejecting the delusions. That's the way they talk.
Thank you.
All right, Cyril, thanks. Yes, Carol.
Thank you, Venerable. Is a personal empowerment necessary for Tantra, please?
Well, I mean, this is something I often, yes, absolutely, there's no question. You have to have, yes, you do. But let's look at the logic of it. I mean, again, I always just try to talk in a very simple way. That's why, Carol, remember, I've always used that example of me learning to make a cake from my mother. You've heard me talk about that, right? Well, think about that, Carol. Think about using this word as a proper English word, empowerment. So or initiation, they would call it. So when I remember vividly the experience of when I first learned to make a cake, the knowledge from my mother's mind. She was a cake maker, so she had knowledge. I was in front of her. I checked on her. I asked her. I wanted to make a cake, and I remember in my mind that moment, that time, that day, the cake. There's a memory in my mind, very fixed, of that experience. And that, I think, why, because at that moment I was ready. I asked my mother, she told me what to do. And this is the point about what all an empowerment initiation is. You receive the power from the mind. I'm just saying these words. You receive that from the mind of another person. So my mother like empowered me to make cakes, and it was a direct experience I had. I remember it vividly. I got the experiential knowledge from my mother's mind. My mind was open. I was there. I asked her. She had the knowledge. She gave it to me, and it went in. That's an empowerment. That's an empowerment. So clearly cake, we're not discussing cakes here, but it's kind of like something we can understand psychologically without making it too esoteric. So yes, of course. So there's certain practices we do. The Tantra, John goes into this in more detail, so you need to study it. There are 4 levels of Tantra. I mean, I know nothing about all this, you know. You've got the first one is Kriya Tantra or action Tantra, and there's different levels. These 4 levels are also defined in terms of how much it is that you utilize, how much of the delusion you utilize. So the very first level, Kriya Tantra, the practices we get like Chenrezig, Tara, Manjushri, quite a few, these are all at that level, and you don't need to receive an empowerment in an initiation in order to do the practice, but it always helps to get it. It's very special to get it. It's very marvelous. You understand? So you don't need to, though. You don't need to. But the highest level, and see, we don't do probably, there aren't many in between. There are 4 levels, and the 4th one is called highest Tantra, or highest yoga Tantra, they call. You need empowerment for that. So then the world, the practices we know about, in order to do those practices, that's like Kala Chakra, Vajrayogini, Haruka Chakra Samvara, He Vajra, Gyawa Gyatso, a whole bunch of them that we know about, that we get. I mean, there's thousands of them. We need empowerment to do those. You can't do those without receiving permission, if you like, and receiving it. And there's in particular receiving the certain components of the initiation. You need to have all those in order to practice yourself. Yes, but not every. Do you understand? Yeah. So I mean, but my simple example of the cake, I mean, it's a ridiculous example, but it's something we can comprehend. And so it's always so important to bring these things down to earth, you know. And they are esoteric, they are outrageous, they are extraordinary, but don't try and think them as only as some, I don't know, just don't mystify them, in other words. So yes, it's the ability you receive, and of course, this is why they say, I mean, there's far more subtle levels to it than that. Oh, infinitely more subtle levels, of course. But yes, that was the answer, Carol. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And finally, to actually in the path, in order to become enlightened, you need to receive a highest yoga tantra empowerment, because when you receive that, you receive these, we might mention this later, there's 4, they call that 4 initiations, that contains these 4 general categories of initiations where, you know, that purify your body, speech, and mind. You need those components in order, and you receive the tantric vows. So you need all of those in order to get enlightened. You can't get enlightened with other practices, it seems, according to the lamas. So anybody else has a question? Nothing? Okay, that's fine. But I really encourage you to read John's. His teachings are so clear, so orderly, so proper.
Alona?
Yes, Alona, yes, darling.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teaching.
Hello, darling. Yes, good.
What is the difference between a mind which is realized emptiness and a Buddha mind?
You know, well, a person who's realized emptiness they're not Buddha yet. You haven't achieved all the realizations.
Oh.
You've just got more work to do. So the first moment you realize emptiness, from that second you cut the root of delusions. So that's a crucial step you have to take. And that means you can't fall back into samsara. That's a major step. But you have to now perfect that realization. Like, you know, one of the ways of presenting the path is the 5, they talk about the 5 paths. So by the 3rd, which is called the path of seeing, that's when you realize emptiness. But then you have the path of meditation and the path of no more learning. You have more, you've got to perfect that realization. You've got to do much more. And when you've perfected that realization, then you've achieved your own nirvana. And you can then, once you die, you won't come back. But if you're on the Mahayana path, you combine that with your practice of bodhicitta. So you have to perfect bodhicitta as well. So the combination of the perfection of emptiness and the perfection of bodhicitta, that's Buddha. So you have more work to do, that's all. You haven't finished. I mean, for that second, you can't go back because you've cut the root, but you have to perfect that realization. You have to deepen the realization by doing more, removing more obstructions from the mind, more obstacles from the mind. And then if you're on the Mahayana path, you've got to add bodhicitta. So there's a massive difference between a Hinayana Arhat and a Mahayana Arhat. Hinayana Arhat is out of samsara, but they haven't got bodhicitta. But when you add bodhicitta to it, that's combining the realization of bodhicitta with the realization of emptiness, which is the realization of wisdom. That's Buddha. Do you understand?
Yes. Yes.
Good, Amanda, thank you. Yes,
Thank
Nina.
you.
Nina.
Hey. Venerable Rubina, is the Dharmakaya also impermanent and empty?
The Dharmakaya, so the Dharmakaya is a word referring to the mind. There's other ways of talking as well, but the Dharmakaya refers to the mind of a Buddha. So it exists, it's a phenomenon, so therefore it's empty. Yes. Everything that exists is empty. But what was the second part you asked? Is it something and is it something? What did you say?
Yeah, and impermanent, because
Oh,
for
okay,
me,
impermanent.
yeah,
There's another
it feels
discussion.
like it's like the end of the journey, and then this is
No, it
where
is,
we
but
wanted to stay.
impermanent doesn't have that meaning. Impermanent, one meaning of impermanent is changing. One meaning of impermanent is something lasts for a short time, but also another meaning of impermanent is it changes from moment to moment. So mind is beginningless. Mind in general is beginningless and endless. So it never doesn't exist, but in its nature, it's changing from moment to moment. That's the nature of everything. Well, enlightened mind is exactly the same. It's impermanent and it is empty. Yes.
Okay.
Do you understand? Good, Nina.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. What else, people? Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Venerable Rubina. Just going to the cake analogy that you were using, I think I understand. On the tantric level, if the cake is a desirable, if it's an attachment we have.
So no, say it again, Mark. Let's just use the right words. So what are you saying? The cake one?
The fourth use of the cake. If I like the cake and I can use the enjoyment of the cake to energize, is basically what I got out of it.
I mean,
But
I use that word energize very loosely. What I meant by energize, if Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha represents controlling the body, speech, and mind, when you've harnessed all that, when you've completely accomplished that, then you can see the tantric one is to energize. So that was a general way I just put it. But specifically, the cake one is the example of utilizing attachment. That's all. That when you're qualified, you can enjoy the object of the senses without the mind going berserk. The way Lam-rim puts it, because you're qualified now.
okay, but what do I do with that energy? I mean, other than being blissful myself.
Okay. So the real point of this is just using a simple analogy. The real point is when in meditation, the yogi who's got single pointed concentration by utilizing deity yoga, visualizing themselves as a deity, and visualizing also in union with the wisdom mother, that energizes, that triggers incredible bliss. And that bliss, because you're in control, that bliss is infinitely more powerful and therefore enables the mind to get more subtle. That bliss is combined with concentration, the mind is enabled to get to the clear light mind, which is the subtlest level of mind. And that's the level of mind you need in order to remove all the obstacles from the mind and become a Buddha. So bliss is like this resource that can be used when it's combined with concentration for the meditating yogi. That's the actual thing. Okay, the mind, okay. In Tantra, they talk about, we talk about, we've got, when you go through the death process, never mind that. When we talk in Vajrayana, you've got gross consciousness, which is the sensory consciousness, and that's combined with the gross body. It's very clear. Well, then you've got subtle consciousness, which is actually your mental states. They're more subtle. And then they're inextricably linked with the subtle physical energy, the 72,000 subtle channels that go throughout the body, and the subtle wind energy that courses through those channels and is linked to your state of mind. This is the subtle body and subtle mind. And then you've got very subtle mind, or the clear light mind, which is the subtlest level of our mind. So that occurs at the 8th stage of death. When that finally arises, the clear light mind, when all the grosser levels of consciousness have ceased, all the grosser levels of physicality have ceased, and there is only the very subtle mind combined inextricably with the very subtle wind. That's the subtlest level of our physical and mental being. And that clear light mind, when it's accessed consciously by the greatest yogis, That's the microscope of the mind that's finally capable of becoming a Buddha, that's capable of removing all the obstructions from the mind, seeing reality, removing all the problems, and literally becoming a Buddha. So the goal is to get to the subtlest level of mind, and Tantra is a quick method for getting to that subtle level of mind, so they can utilize that mind to become a Buddha very quickly.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you.
Oh, good. That's it. So in other words, Lama Sessi says Tantra is very technical. It's finally technical, you know. It's technology, sophisticated technology. That's the point. We're trying to get the mind to become a Buddha. And the only mind that can do that, the subtlest level, is the clear light mind, the very subtle consciousness. And these techniques of combining bliss with concentration in the tantric methods is up. The subtlety is able to be accessed, even with the level of bliss and the level of subtlety got by shamatha in the sutra practices is not powerful enough. They're not powerful enough to get the mind to the subtlest level. That's how they talk. Anybody else, people?
Venerable Robina, Giulio here. Is that what allowed you to reach a direct realization of emptiness?
Please forgive me, would you repeat that question?
Is that what allowed you to reach a direct realization of emptiness? A direct realization of emptiness?
No, you can realize emptiness without Tantra. No.
A direct
no, but the realization of emptiness, if it is that, is a direct realization, and that can be accomplished with the sutra practices. You don't need Tantra for that.
Even indirect.
You're saying direct, right?
Yes.
Yes, that direct realization of emptiness is a realization of emptiness that's beyond conceptual. That can be realized with the sutra teachings. That's taught already in the Mahayana path before you get to Tantra. Okay. But if you're practicing Tantra, it would come more quickly, definitely, because the mind gets more subtle, more powerfully, more quickly. Yes. Are we clear? Are we communicating?
Yeah.
Good. Yes, John.
Your microphone.
Sorry. Thank you, Venerable Robina. Would it be correct to say that since in samsara, we're always chasing happiness or pleasure, but we're doing it kind of unskillfully or in an incorrect way, would Tantra be like a skillful means of getting to the object of your desire or something like that? Like in the sense that we're always trying to escape suffering and get to pleasure or happiness, but we do so in ways that actually don't get us there, right? So would it be, is that a relevant consideration? That
I wouldn't say it's quite like, I wouldn't put it like that, because the fact is, yes, you're right about we're always chasing happiness, and the part of us that is doing that is called attachment. Attachment is this over-exaggerating. Attachment is this dissatisfaction. We're driven by dissatisfaction. I've never got enough. So it's always this emotional hunger. There's always wanting something more. And therefore, and then it exaggerates the deliciousness of the beautiful boy, the deliciousness of the cake, the deliciousness of everything. And then we're convinced that when I get it, I'll get happiness. So the Buddha is saying we do get happy feelings. Happy feelings are triggered by eating the cake. Happy feelings are triggered by listening to that music. Happy feelings are triggered by contact with the new boyfriend. That is true, but he's saying that happiness doesn't last, and it's polluted because it's driven by the junky mind of attachment. So that's true. That is exactly what he's telling us. And so he's saying we need to give up attachment. That's the second scope of the lam-rim. So Tantra is a more sophisticated method, yes, of achieving Buddhahood, but it's an ability to utilize that attachment. But the person, the only person who's qualified, you could say that, the only person who's qualified to utilize the bliss that's triggered by contact with an attachment object is a person who's gone beyond attachment, is no longer in the thrall of attachment. That's the point.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
So the important here to remember the words like happiness and bliss and joy, they're all synonymous, and they're not attachment. They are states of mind. And Buddha's methods, his general methods from beginning to end, are methods of how to get joy, how to get happiness, how to quit suffering. So Tantra is just a more sophisticated method of doing that. But it's,
Okay, thank
as
you.
we've been discussing, it's based on the prerequisites of the earlier stages of practice.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Jivrab, yes,
Hello.
yes.
I have a question that what does repaying a karmic debt to someone mean?
I don't understand the question, darling. Tell me again. Ask again.
Repaying a karmic debt that you owe to someone. What does
I
that
know
mean?
it's sort of a way of talking. Like, you know, if you and I are good friends in ordinary just life, I'll use a simple analogy. If you're really kind to me and you suddenly, I needed money urgently to go somewhere and you lend me the money, well, I could argue I've got a debt to you. I'm not you don't tell, you know, you don't say I want you to pay it back, but emotionally I feel like I now should do a nice action to you in return. So you can argue like that. So then if, you know, if let's say I come into this life as your child, we've got a very strong karmic relationship from past time. And if you are a good mother to me, then that would be because I've been kind to you. So in that sense, a mother, by being kind to her baby, is repaying a karmic debt, in the sense that the only reason you're kind to me is I must have been kind to you. And if you're mean, if you're an ugly mother and mean to me and beat me up, well, it's because I must have been mean to you. So, you know, we don't want to do that one though. So it sounds quite heavy to repay a karmic debt, but it's just really, you know, giving what you received. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you. So if your child has some sort of illness, and does it mean that you are repaying that debt to him in terms of?
Well, I mean, to be more, no. So that could be for, no. That could, no, not like that. I put it this way. If you've got a child who's suffering, then that child is due to their own karma that they're suffering, but you clearly have created the cause. They have created the cause from the past of being kind to you because you're taking care of them. So you're taking care of that suffering child. That's really the result of their having taken care of you. Their suffering is their own. Their suffering's got nothing to do with you. But the fact that they're born to you and you're a kind mother looking after them and protecting them, that's the fruit of their own past virtue. So you're definitely repaying a karmic debt by being kind to them. But their suffering is not to do with you. That's different. Are we communicating here?
Yes, thank you.
All right, darling. So I think we're done really today. Just the general, I mean, please, I need you to study before next class. You must read John Landau. He goes into the 3 principal aspects of the path in the beginning, in the first class. And we've done that in a very simple way, but his teachings are really helpful. And then I've just touched on various kind of principles, trying to explain it in my simple words, which I hope don't mislead you, you know. So John will go into it in much more detail. So I require you to read this. So much more sensible. All right, darling people. So next week I'll be in, I'm in Sydney at the moment. I just left my family. I told you because my sister died. So I've been 2 weeks in Melbourne with my family, my sisters and my brother. And where will I be next week? I think I'm in Sydney now for a few days. And then I'm going to be next week, I'm going to be in Brisbane, which is up north. Brisbane is like America's Florida, except it's north instead of south, because we're the other side of the world, you know. And it's winter here, of course. It's midwinter here, but Sydney's subtropical, so it's not too bad. Australia's an odd country. We don't have any extreme weather. And it's so odd. Australia apparently is the lowest on the planet. It's only average of 300 meters above sea level. It's the lowest country on earth. And where I was living in Santa Fe, I discovered this. It's like 4,000 meters or something. I forget. And that's the highest point in Australia. The highest mountain in Australia is called Mount Kosciuszko. It's the southeastern corner of Australia is where there's a bit of green. The rest of Australia is like red desert. It's so peculiar. And that's where the highest mountain is. So it's an odd country, Australia, a very odd place, very odd piece of earth. And also it's bigger than the United States, but it's only got 25 million people, and 4/5 of Australians live in the 5 cities that are around the coast. So Brisbane's north, you go down a bit on the right, you get Sydney, you go down to the bottom, you get Melbourne, you go across to the left, you get Adelaide, and you go all the way to the other side and you've got Perth. 5 cities probably have 4/5 of Australia's population. It's the most odd place. Anyway, there you go, bit of Australian geography, not that I know anything. So I'll be in Brisbane next week, which is in the tropics, but it's not too hot at the moment. And we think, please, you need to read John's teachings. He'll keep you on the ground. I just say a few silly words, hopefully enhancing a bit, trying to understand it. But even the things I've said today, that it needs you to understand what happiness is, what the definition is, what the definition of attachment, what's the definition of delusion. If you don't know those, the words are all confusing. You get them all wrong. You won't use them properly. It's so important, these things. This is what we've studied before, you know. Okay, so we dedicate, we think, these teachings we've had, this discussion we've had, we think we're going to dedicate all these seeds we planted so that we quickly become a Buddha. So we'll be qualified to eventually receive empowerments and use these amazing techniques so we can quickly become a Buddha. Not because we're lazy, but because the suffering of sentient beings is so unbearable. Try and imagine that, you know. And so we get, for our sake and for the sake of others as well, to recognize our amazing potential. May we be able to do that as quickly as possible. And may bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. May our realizations of emptiness grow and grow. And may we never give up. Changchob, Semchob, Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Keguchi, Kepa Nyampa, Mepayang, Gongne, Gondu, Pavashok. Okay. Thank you, sweethearts. Next week. Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.